Hey people, what's good? Mount Lethe Hellfire. Welcome back for another video. Hope everybody's doing well, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. In this channel, I explore concepts across signals intelligence, electronic warfare, and general communications principles for the prepared citizen. I also do more specialist content on AR-15, SR-25, M110, and AK, both Yugo pattern and Romanian AKM pattern, gunsmithing, some suppressor testing, and I'll continue to widen the scope of the channel and cover things like 3D printing as it pertains to those other topics, as well as UAS, drones, things like that. So if any of that interests you, I implore you to stick around, check out the rest of the videos on the catalog. And if you like what you see, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've grown a lot since I released my last comms video, so I really appreciate everybody else who's put up with my shit and hopefully learned a thing or two. And for everybody, please do like the video. That'll help the channel grow as well as fine-tune your algorithm so content like this is recommended to you. Comment down below if you have any feedback, any questions, comments, if you enjoyed it, if you hated it, if there's anything else you want to see. And finally, if anybody else in your network or that you know would find this useful, educational, entertaining, or otherwise, please consider sharing the video with them and encouraging them to like and subscribe as well. Thank you very much. So as you can tell from the title, the thumbnail, and just the overall length of the video, I'm actually recording this after I've done my 7th voiceover. I feel like I have been working on this for over 3 weeks trying to get it right, and I don't think it'll ever be fully perfect. So here we go. It's a lot of information, and most of it I'm going to be delivering not here, but via PowerPoint. Actually, pretty much all the information is going to be developed or delivered via PowerPoint. I'm not trying to do a second lieutenant LARP or a bit here, but it's an information dense topic because to talk about signals intelligence, to talk about information operations, we really need to talk about what is intelligence as a discipline, as a theory, the things that go into it, building the reports. It's not going to be so much on like the hands-on as much as is just general education, as well as a ton of resources that are also in the video description for you guys to go through to do your own reading up to see if I interpreted this stuff right, wrong, or otherwise. This will also hopefully unlock me for my, incessant need to talk a lot and over explain concepts. So if you're here in the future and I referred you to this video from something else, hey, thank you very much for watching it. Now, the important caveat, I suppose, is that I'm not a professional, but you should try this at home. I've never held an Intel MOS. I wasn't an 18 Fox or anything on active duty. So this is based on my understanding and, of course, my own anecdotal experience, actually having been on active duty and working with Intel shops and working with Intel professionals in the cybersecurity field as well. So if you are a real Intel guy or gal, I would definitely love your feedback as well, especially more so along the lines of, is this really how it's done, right? Because when I got out of the schoolhouse for my MOSs, get to my unit, it's like, yeah, forget everything you just learned. Here's how we really do it. Timestamps will be down below. I will need to set up some infrastructure on my side. I want to get like a website set up dedicated to the channel so I could put out some more bespoke content. So any slides that I do, any presentations that I do, code snippets, things like that, I can mirror off on the website and then you guys could go and get them from there. But for now, just bear with me. So again, hopefully if you're watching this in the future, I've already solved that problem or at least remembered to. Now I'm going to stop yapping and we're going to get over to the slideshow. So I'll see you over there. All right, folks, so here we go. Time to pour yourself out a beverage of choice and settle in. This is going to be a long one, but hopefully very informative for you. So as I spoke about in the intro a little bit, beyond the caveats I normally give, the intent of this is not to make you or make us as a community of, prepared citizens, Minutemen, however you want to identify yourself as. It's not to make us be like the military in the way that they structure intelligence. And in fact, if you read any doctrinal publication from the military, it'll even say that, hey, this is doctrine and you should rely on your own initiative, your own intent, and your own experience to carry out. But it does give us a good operating model, a common language in which to talk about the topic. And, why not explain it? If I'm going to explain signals intelligence, if I don't explain intelligence, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But now, why learn about intelligence to begin with? So for me, it's primarily around intellectual curiosity. Oh, and sorry for any background noises you might hear. The kids are home from school for the summer. So intellectual curiosity, and if nothing else, to know that, hey, just because it's intelligence doesn't mean it's secretive. It doesn't mean it's a state secret. It's not classified as secret, unless, of course, it needs to be, but that's something entirely different. Next, it makes you a good consumer of intel. And I don't mean from like, oh, I appreciate your intelligence product, I understand it. Now, perhaps you could do that, but there's a ton of intel. But there are a lot of intel channels on YouTube, or maybe not a lot, there's a decent handful, though most of them focus in the United States on domestic policy and things that are happening. And typically they have a political alignment or a political leaning, which good intelligence shouldn't have, to be honest, unless it's relevant. But we'll get into that later. But what I mean is, if you're aware of what needs to go into it, the actual rigors behind intel, perhaps that'll make you make a better informed decision, no pun intended, since we're talking about intelligence, for the type of intel you consume, especially for paid for products. Again, focusing on foreign and domestic policy, foreign and domestic happenings, be it civil unrest or otherwise, or even travel advisories if you're going out. Next, if you choose, it'll make you a good producer, hopefully, at least at the doctrinal level. And then understand that external organizations, be they militaristic, police forces, dedicated intelligence agencies, or otherwise, also use intelligence. Perhaps if you're a professional end user or a professional in whatever field you are and you interoperate, and you're going to be part of an intelligence cycle of another organization, this might help inform you how to better partner with them. But also, it could help, if not outright counter, perhaps harden yourself, because nobody could really counter it. And I don't mean it counter from counterintelligence. I mean, make yourself harder to collect data against, going back to OPSEC and PERSEC and all the things that I spoke about in the first video, the introduction to advanced communications for prepared citizens. But definitely, it'll at least make you aware of kind of the IO paradigm. And if knowing is half the battle and intelligence is that knowing part, then knowing about intelligence, I guess, is a quarter of the battle. So we're halfway to halfway. Now, why intelligence? Really, it comes down to making an informed decision, taking an informed action is better than just YOLOing it. A lot more people use it than you know. And hell, you might not have followed a distinctive process for Intel, but you've probably made some informed decisions in your life, right? Maybe you had to pick a new school to go to or a school for your kids, purchase a new house, and you want to understand the neighborhood and the schools and things to do and the job market, the real estate market, or even bought a new car and you wanted to dive deep into residual values, maintenance, or if you've sat in corp dev at a VC firm, at a private equity firm, doing any sort of M&A due diligence, then you would have done some competitive intelligence perhaps to enforce or to make a better buying decision. And really, at the end of the day, it's taking all the things that happen and relevant to signals intelligence, all the emissions that are happening all the time. There's RF energy literally everywhere, and using it for, well, insightful purposes. So what is intelligence, at least according to military doctrine rather. So I'm not going to read these off to you. Feel free to slow down the video or pause the video here. But the one thing that I'll have you note is that no matter what the doctrinal publication is, or at least the one thing I'll draw your attention to is that no matter who the doctrinal publication is from, be it ADP from the Army or an AFDP from the Air Force or otherwise, if it's written after October 2013, they're likely going to take a lot of their definitions and a lot of their reference material from this. This is kind of, well, the open source Intel Bible, or at least close to it. JP, Joint Publication 2-0. Hey, S2 shops, a 2, get it? Everything has a 2. Joint Intelligence by, well, the Joint Chiefs or a specific component of the Joint Chiefs. And I put an excerpt here from 1994 of Naval Intelligence just so you could see that the definition really hasn't changed. And again, I'm not going to bother reading it to you. I have a summarization in the next slide. Now, in all these doctrinal publications, there's typically a quote from a military leader, a picture, a diagram of some sort. And in JP 2-0, they have one from Karl von Clausewitz from his book On War in 1832. And it's very succinct, and I actually quite like this, so I'll read this one. By intelligence, we mean every sort of information about the enemy and his country, the basis, in short, of our own plans and operations. And of course, in this case, Clausewitz didn't just mean like the country geography-wise, he also meant the politics and who could be subject to influence and whatnot. So that's really also what military intelligence is all about, but also intel that we'll do as prepared citizens. And to quickly sum up the definition of intelligence as an art, science, however you want to describe it, by JP 2-0, Joint Intelligence, It's the process of collecting, analyzing, disseminating information. Your goal is to reduce uncertainty, support action, support decision making, whatever it is. There's several military specific disciplines. Obviously, we're going to borrow the terminology. And really, all of these are about gleaning intel from specific sources or specific parts of the information environment. Signals intelligence from signals. It's made up of three subdisciplines. Comment, communications intelligence, intel gleaned from more human-to-human comms. ELINT, which is more machine-to-machine comms, so think your data radios, things like wave relay from persistent systems and MPU5s, and M and MIMO from Civs Technologies radios, even though they're Motorola now. And then obviously within the military context, radar satellites. And then there's SIGINT, which is more specific to space, but also missiles in their terminal phase or missiles when they're launched. So that's a foreign instrument. Human intelligence, intel gleaned from humans, be it through coercion, deception, seduction, whatever it is, right? And then handling those human assets, double agents, spies, all that stuff. This is typically what people think of, if you ask like a random civilian in the street, like, hey, what's intel? What does an intelligence agency do? They'll probably talk about human. GeoInt is intel gleaned, well, from the geography of the earth, but also the subdiscipline of IMINT, which is imagery intelligence. So, photographs, which are taking either in the visible light spectrum or IR, MWIR, SWIR, shortwave IR, midwave IR, things like that. Measurement and signature intelligence, I would say this is probably the most scientific of all the intel disciplines, right next to signals. There is a lot of overlap between ELINT, PHYSINT, and MASINT, as well as TECHINT, which is technically its own thing, but I don't have it up here because you don't really see it a whole lot. And obviously that'll change because the doctrine continues to develop as technology develops, right? But this is quantitative and science-based signatures from sensors that measure these things. Acoustic, thermal, hydrostatic, stuff like that. And then FINIT is, intel gleaned from financial transactions and financial networks, everything down to Hawala networks, barter systems, which would have overlap with human, to IBAN, SWIFT, blockchain, credit card transactions, Venmo, stuff like that. Then there's other intel that doesn't necessarily fall under a purely military designation. Open source intelligence, which is very, very broad because it's anything in the open source. Newspaper articles, social media posts, Reddit posts, things like that. And then SOCMENT, you typically see this called out specifically with the cybersecurity domain, but I think it's good to call it out because the way that you gather data from social media is a little bit different. It's a wider corpus, a wider collection, it's a wider corpus of data. The way that you exploit it and gather it is typically API driven or by scraping a lot of data. And it's changed with the advent of these newer frontier models from AI companies like large language models. Think OpenAI, Grok, Anthropic, Mistral rather, from France, stuff like that. So the APIs that are typically not as full featured or not as easy to get access to, or not as easy to get access to the amount of data that you needed to get access to as in the past. Cyber threat intelligence is actually kind of relevant in the military domain of CEMA, cyber electromagnetic activities. We'll speak about that later. This is near and dear to my heart because I've ran offensive cyber and red teams in the cybersecurity domain, but this is more intelligence about something versus intelligence gleaned from something. So I'm not trying to get intel from the cyber threats. I'm trying to get it about them. Competitive intelligence is the same thing. Now, what are the hallmarks of good intelligence, right? You learned what it is. Why should we learn about it? So the main thing to remember is that if it's not relevant, it's not useful. I mean, that sounds a bit stupid explaining, but if you're collecting data just for collecting data and it's not to exercise those cognitive muscles, right? Like you're not learning how to use an SDR, capture IQ files, decode them for ADSB, AIS, things like that. And don't worry, we'll talk about that later as well. But, if you, again, it's meant to support a specific decision. And if you're not asking the right questions relevant to that decision, well, it's not useful. And just like making a YOLO decision, making a decision that's informed, except you're informed about the wrong thing. It's like if you wanted to buy a Hellcat, right? And you want to understand the, what are the residual values? What's the likelihood that I'm going to get carjacked? How performant and maintenance worthy or maintenance ready, however you want to say that, is the Dodge supercharged engines, right? And then I give you a bunch of crap on Mercedes-Benz. Like, oh, bro, check it out. You know, the W231 GLE 53 AMG, it's a V6 and it's bi-turbocharged and has 4MATIC. And you're like, okay, well, that's not a Hellcat, my dude. All right, so again, it's a little weird to explain that, but that's what it means. Good intelligence, you should always prove your work. And you could read this chart down here below. I just kind of did some small descriptions, mostly for the sake of fitting it into this table, but not your prove your work is, not only annotating the sources, even though it's quite hard to do with signals intelligence, especially the type that I hope to teach you folks about later on down the road, because we're going to be collecting a lot of data, baby. Even from the humble RTL-SDR, you could support a lot of communications and ISM bands with that, but your decision tree, right? And again, you're meant to be useful. You're not meant to be a future teller. It's supposed to be relevant, and it's not supposed to be bombastic or anything crazy. And then lastly, beware of bias. And I don't mean bias from like the, culture war, check your biases sort of thing. I mean a cognitive bias, right? As humans, as individuals, we all have our own way of looking at the world. We have our own religions, our own cultures, our own communities, neighborhoods, especially here in the United States. But you always want to be aware of it to make sure that's not getting there. And again, with signals intelligence, it's a bit, I don't want to say it's harder for bias to show up. It definitely can with reporting, but it's mostly, it comes in earlier in the cycle. Maybe not in the full report, if you do a full report, or if you ever want to do one, but more when you collect it, like making assumptions. And speaking of which, let's actually go into some of the top analyst biases. So these are just a couple that I could think of. I'm sure there's a lot more. I don't want to turn this into like a Jordan Peterson type show, or, true crime or something like that. But bias and collection, interpretation, reporting. I put some quotes about, like, maybe something that you might say to yourself, right? Where I only looked where I thought something would be. So let's say you and your training group, you guys use encrypted comms like you're supposed to, but you're getting in spurious transmissions. You see your Hytera radio, it's turning orange, it's not turning green. It's like, okay, somebody's on our band. We can't listen to them. So maybe you go down and you go onto plain text in that same band, in that same frequency, and you're just hearing a bunch of static, a bunch of garbled noise, a bunch of beeping, blooping, whatnot. Is this forcible deception? Did I mess up on a code plug? Does this keep happening, right? Those are questions you might ask yourself. And then it's like, okay, let me just collect there. But what if it was, a very outsized, large source of electromagnetic radiation, perhaps even from a different frequency, and it's just so powerful that it's overcoming whatever radio you have? So you checked VHF, mirrors, or you checked UHF GMRS. Refer back to the first video again. For that, I don't want to rehash these, at least not yet. But maybe it came from somewhere else. Well, probably not HF, but maybe it came from like 700, 800, 900 ISM bands, something like that, right? Interpretation, I think this is a big killer. Expecting what you want to see. This could also be because of a confirmation bias or cognitive dissonance, where it's like, oh, I'm the best. I have my AI agent set up, and I have all my decoders set up, and I have all my scripts, and I could process and exploit the data very easily. And this is exactly what happened. That sort of thing is dangerous, right? It's, again, made up on interpretation. It's best effort. It's to be useful. You're not trying to prove anybody right, that you're the biggest, smartest person out there, right? Especially if you're doing this, again, in the proper context of this video as a prepared citizen. We don't really have space, or we shouldn't have space, for egos. I'm not saying that we can't tolerate it to a certain degree, but if you, actually want to not weaponize intelligence, but use it for its purpose, again, to make informed decisions, you should probably, check against that as well, especially with, cognitive dissonance of thinking that you have all the collection, everything figured out. So how do we combat those? And combating biases, again, not a Jordan Peterson show, right? I'm not trying to be your head shrink or nothing like that, but there's a couple things you could do. So structured analytical techniques, I believe, is the scientific way to say it. Not SATs as in the test to get to college, even though I've never been, so I don't know anything about SATs. And I'm not joking about that either. But really what this section is saying, at least these two, are always test alternative. Ask yourself, why? What am I not seeing? Or even better yet, with a better cognitive habit, bias logging, right? Maybe, while you're out in the field with your SDR set up, nice comfy on your couch, and you're listening to the SDR and you're seeing your data come in and getting stored in your, ClickHouse warehouse or wherever you're putting the data, and we'll get into that in future videos. Don't you worry, man. I want to learn you something. And ladies, all two of you that watch this channel. But being able to take a log of things that you thought you saw or things that you interpreted as, oh yeah, that's definitely APRS data, or oh, that's probably a military satellite, or oh, that's just drones, or oh, that's probably the neighbor's freaking high-powered Wi-Fi. They have ubiquity, and then it ended up not being. Building that stuff in and going back and be like, wow, I'm wrong a lot. I'm a dumbass, right? It's not to beat yourself up. It's to combat a lot of those biases. But then on a more advanced perspective, and this is, again, we're going to keep saying it, another topic that I talked about at length, red teaming, where, okay, we think we know what a drone signature is on passive radar, or what it looks like on our scanners if it's at, X amount of, meters or feet above the ground, above us, about to, drop a donkey dong on our foreheads. Let's go out and do it. Let's go improve it. Let's go fly the drone over us and we'll collect it. Let's test our MCON. Let's actually test to see what texting data looks like on a spectrogram, on a waterfall chart, right? That sort of thing. And then SOPs, I think that goes into everything we do, right? The way that we set up our kit, the way that we might set up our guns, the way that we might set up our uniforms. And this goes more for, again, that kind of like semi-professional agencies, and obviously, if you're Intel military. But again, if you're Intel military, what the hell are you doing watching this video, man? I don't know what I'm talking about that much. Peer review, that's a given, or at least having somebody to go over this stuff with, and having somebody look over your work, or asking questions, even in your like collection phase, like, hey, is this the right way to do it? Should I be using the software? Should I be using this mechanism, this antenna, right, whatnot? And then, if anything else, if you have opinions on the matter, they should be labeled as such. Maybe you even go as far as actually doing reporting as part of your training group. And, look, I know a lot of folks thumb their nose at it and think it's corny, but you should do field training exercises, FTXs, with the boys, with the girls. Go out there and, incorporate this stuff in your training. And perhaps, as you make your assumptions and you do a report, or even just a readout with a whiteboard around a campfire with, but normalizing your confidence levels, having specific ways that you, label caveats. Maybe you number them from like 1 through 3, 1 through 5. Maybe you use like green, amber, red, black, things like that. However you do it, SOPs to install it. So enough about bias. Let's actually get into it. So at a high level, this is actually what intelligence looks like functionally, or at least at a doctrinal level. These are all the subcomponents that make up Intel. All these in the bottom are parts of the intelligence lifecycle, or the intelligence cycle, which we're going to cover. And all these are the actual artifacts, or, kind of precursors to starting an intelligence gathering operation, mission, LARP, whatever you want to call it. But really, at the end of the day, like I said, it's taking all the disaggregated, seemingly unrelated, or stuff that you're just not actively observing in your information environment, whatever that is. It could be in the cyber domain, space domain, if you're into tracking satellites, or you do like a satellite red teaming offensive security stuff. It could be with IoT, it could be with ICS, OT, and obviously radios. Then you want to actually collect that stuff, turn it into just raw data. It's unprocessed, it's maybe a little filtered, but it's as raw as data could be. You want to turn that data into information by processing and exploiting it. And we'll talk about examples, as I've said, right? Like taking in the IQ files, decoding it, taking in the waterfalls and spectrogram, and maybe visualizing all of it over time with like fast Fourier transform fields, if you like use RTL power or PyBlade RF, things like that. And then you analyze it to see what happens. Maybe you overlay it with other sorts of intelligence. You have, a WinTAC going on, or using ArcGIS to like plot where you might know, or you might think where specific sites are for interference, or likely areas people are launching drones from, especially if you're in the middle of the freaking woods, or whatever it is, to finally turn it into intel. You disseminate it, and then you make your decision. Or perhaps you just index right here because you just wanted to practice it. So now all these things here on the left side, we're actually going to dive into CCIR, PIR, FFIR, EEIs, and we're going to do that now. But the way I like to look at Intel is I'm filling in the middle of a story. And maybe not the whole story, right? Maybe this is just Act 1, but to get to Act 1, I have to ask questions. I have to have a job to be done, a mission, whatever you want to call it, or a curiosity, a hunch. And then everything that you do, from setting the direction, which a lot of this does contribute to setting your direction to get started, and collecting and processing and exploiting and running the Python scripts and running the Rust binaries and all that stuff to eventually reach your decision. That is Intel. And, it's really the simplest way that I could put it all in one slide. Now let's actually dissect what all this stuff means. All right, so PIRs, Priority Intelligence Requirements. This is something you're going to learn to love to hate, one of those things, right? So this is essentially what must we know. And it's the component of what's known as, let me get the laser pointer back up, the commander's critical information requirement. So again, the commander, this is military intelligence, right? So obviously there's going to be a commander, but somebody has to make a decision somewhere. So you or some other leader within your training group, within your organization, has something that they need to ask the question. And it's like, hey, who the hell is flying drones around here? It's like, huh, okay, you talking to us? Yeah, I'm talking to you, jack off. What must I know about drones flying around? Well, clearly, there's a lot of things, right? It's like, well, what kind of drone? Where'd it come from? Who's piloting it? Things like that, right? So you want to be able to support the commander, the decision maker, the leader, the shot caller, whatever you want to call yourself, right? You got to review and refine these all the time. And hell, you might find that you stop your intelligence cycle if you're asking the wrong questions. And that goes back to biases and constantly questioning things. Are we doing the right thing? Is this relevant to the decision, the action, or just the overall information requirement that's being made of us? Your information environment will largely guide what PIRs are possible, as well as what the end goal is, a purchase target, a mission, the decision, and your technical capabilities. Again, this is one of these things I feel like I shouldn't have to explain, but if you don't have a Blade RF or something that could support anything above 2.4 gigahertz ISM, including 2.4 gigahertz ISM, well, good luck trying to freaking capture RF data on drones, unless you are adapting like a Wi-Fi dongle or something to specifically capture RID data, or if you're looking for people using C-band radios around you, and it's like, well, can you collect in the 4.8 gigahertz range? No. Well, clearly you shouldn't set a PIR about it. That'll be code black or white in your reporting, where it's like, hey, we have no information at this time about this thing. But if collecting C-band was relevant, obviously you would go and procure material to do that. And like I showed in the previous slide, it guides that first step, that direction step of the intelligence lifecycle. And every PIR, the what must we know questions, are divided into essential elements of information, or EEIs. Now, these are the details that we must know to answer the question. And you would split these out based on observable facts, right? So going back to the drone thing, it's who's piloting the damn drone in my AO, soldier? Would be something that, your freaking platoon leader or some shit would say to you. If, I don't know, I guess you were an ELINTer or something, or you had a KUAS mission, which is apparently everybody's mission now, given what's going on all around the world in hot conflicts with, well, peer hot conflicts, right? So you would break those things out into, okay, let's see if we could find remote ID or open drone ID or OcuSync 3 traffic. Let's see if we could actually get measurements and readings on 2.4, 5.2, 5.8 gigahertz ISM bands to see, maybe we could work backwards from that if we can't get the RID data. And if nothing else, this is where you bring in another intelligence discipline like MASINT or like GEOINT to see, okay, who's launching stuff, maybe use OSINT to see if there's like a drone club or something. Because remember, you don't want to assume malice where there is none, right? And then maybe you will dive into other intel disciplines like GEOINT to be like, okay, well, if I were to launch a drone, where would I launch it from? Maybe there's a designated area. Maybe you use OSINT to look up local laws and ordinances. And, when I was living in New Jersey, I found out the hard way a couple times that aeroscopes are used in just about every single state park. Anytime I flew a DJI drone, there'd be wardens, there'd be stadies on my ass, be like, what are you doing? You can't fly here. I'm like, oh, dude, I'm sorry. I'm just a photographer. Meanwhile, I was testing out like airborne retrans rigs. One of them was like, what the hell is that? I'm like, oh, it's just a, beyond line of sight repeater. Because I was licensed, so I could do, non-line of sight flights, but that's a story for another time. So the EEIs, again, there's specific details, and they have to be measurable, right? You'll see it called indicators, observables, notables. So it's a good way to check that PIR, that priority intelligence requirement, if you can't clearly define, like, okay, what's the thing we're measuring? What are we capturing, you motherfucker? Tell me right now. So if you can't articulate that clearly, then, well, your PIR is busted, or you just don't know to ask the right questions. Start again. The EEIs are what guide step 2, the collection phase, right? Like when you hear people like, oh, Intel collections effort, this is what they're talking about, the EEIs. But before you go and do that, don't forget about what you and your buddies are doing. These are known as FFIRs, Friendly Force Information Requirements. And, well, it's information about you guys, right? So from like I guess if you put it in a hierarchy, they'd be siblings to PIRs. They wouldn't be a PIR themselves. And it's a component of the CCIR, right? So obviously, if this is a military setting, you'd have your battalion commander who, owns a specific sector of the battlefield. Obviously, you want to know where your guys are going. Like what, villages are we assaulting? What trench lines are we holding? What material do we have? What missions are we planning? So it's Blue Force tracking. That's really what it is. But it also goes into the collection effort. Again, relevant to SIGINT, if you're doing an FTX with your buddies and you guys are doing sticks lanes and you're communicating on the radio, or you have a red cell electronic warfare thing going on where you're trying to check if people are practicing good MCON with body blocking, they're using short comm windows, they're rolling over channels and whatnot, going through the pace plan. And then you have another, sticks lane or, well, IO lane going on and you're collecting SIGINT. You probably want to know what's going on, what hours these things are going on. So when you start to see, very large DBI values or received signal strength indicators for specific frequencies, like, aha, you see somebody's following us. It's the feds, the boom's happening, it's the glowies, they're coming after us. And it's like, no, dumbass, those are just your buddies, right? So FFIRs, don't forget them. All right, so to recap everything that we just learned as part of the intelligence cycle, which is again a cycle, so that means we continuously do it. Now I put fine-tuned PIRs here. Technically you would do that as a tabletop exercise, or hopefully you're doing that when you're defining the PIRs, where it's like, are we asking the right questions? Are we looking for the right details? Are we capable of gleaning these details, these EEIs, from our information environment or information environments? And are we taking in consideration more things than SIGINT? It's used to, produce intelligence products, and it measures impact in the grand scheme of things. So after you've done these a couple of times, if you do adapt the intelligence cycle, either doctrinally or in some part, as you continue to generate SIGINT artifacts, be it, dedicated to counter UAS, dedicated to monitoring air traffic, dedicated to monitoring disaster responses across the country, or maybe you just want to keep up with what the ham guys are saying or what your local PD, state PD are doing. The more you do them, obviously, the better that you'll get, but also you'll see as time goes on, hey, did we ask the right questions? Did we meticulously follow the cycle? So here's the best graphic I could muster using PowerPoint's tools. And again, not to rehash too much of this, but phase 1, direction. Phase 2, collection. Phase 3, process and exploit, analyze, disseminate. You could read the slide, I hope. And again, just a little bit of the cheat sheet here on the left. What do we need to do and what do we need to know and why? Go gather, go deduplicate it, process it, generate insights off of it, actually analyze it, use that 4-pound fleshy anxiety machine between your ears that's in your skull, your brain, if you didn't pick up what that meant. Bring in other forms of intelligence, even though you could do that throughout the whole process, and then disseminate it, share it with your buddies in the goon cave, so to speak. And then I just put a couple different examples and then visualization showing like, okay, we capture observables, data to information, information intelligence, and then finally we have the final product, and then we repeat. You see that shit? That took way too many times. You see that shit? That took way too much time to get it to look like that. Moving on. So that's intelligence. And just to loop back and again connect with the first video I did where I talked about EMSO and SEMA and all that stuff, I wanted to open up the aperture, widen the scope here just for a second to talk about information operations. This is based on my take of Joint Publication 3-12, information operations, which includes information warfare, influence ops, electronic warfare, cyber. Now, technically, when you hear information operations, they're typically talking about information warfare or otherwise things in the influence side, messaging, counter messaging, that sort of thing. But depending on the doctrine, depending on the year, and then also looking at blog posts and writing from the defense industrial base in the United States and even abroad in foreign militaries, it is widened to include cyber and electronic warfare, not just as effects that are desired or capabilities that help with influence, but as standalone capabilities, as you'll see here. So, from a military perspective, the things that we want to enable typically deal with one or more of these boxes, maybe all of them, right? We want to, well, shoot, move, and communicate. And then, like I say, civilians communicate, move, and shoot. And our tactical level would be like, hey, stop, don't do that. I don't want to do it. Don't hurt me. Oh, I'm going to run away now. And then if you're backed into a corner and it's legal to do so and you have no other way out, then you fucking bust a cap in their ass. But that's not the channel to talk about it. There's plenty of people who do that. So this entire grid hierarchy that I created, the better way to look at it, and I don't have the artistic or the slideshow capabilities to do so, is as a hypercube, a four-dimensional cube where everything is connected everywhere, even though that would appear more in a 2D version of a hypercube. And I mean that all of these things up here can support these capabilities, these missions. These missions could support one another, and a lot of times they work in concert. And then also these missions manifest themselves as various forms of ISRT or in support of intelligence, or the intelligence supports it, right? But just to make things simple, we're talking about SIGINT and information operations. So I put IO at the top. You might put IW at the top. IO might just mean influence operations to you, depending, again, if you're in a professional organization. If you are, you shouldn't be watching this probably, because I really don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not in the Joint Chiefs. So whether you want to, communicate, move, shoot, or stop people from doing that, or monitor people doing that, you're going to need intel, right? Because remember, it's to help us make a timely, informed decision. All sources, not just SIGINT, and then ISRT is how you quote unquote do an intelligence, right? So intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, targeting. Other doctrine, you might see this as RSTA, reconnaissance, surveillance, target acquisition. It's a very Cav Scout Army thing, or RTA, reconnaissance, target acquisition, which is a Marine thing or a Marine Force recon specific thing. Doesn't really matter. We're Civs at the end of the day, or at least I am. So IO, like I said, I bracketed off influence and the electromagnetic side of the house, and that's what EMSO is, electromagnetic spectrum operations. And you see it in this little gradient that matches all these colors. How cool of me. And then influence ops, I'm not really going to talk about this because, well, I've never done any of these jobs, and yeah. So underneath that, I put information warfare coming across the top here, because typically to achieve information warfare effects or to achieve MILDEC, military deception, one or more of these capabilities, these missions, teams are going to be employed. And then further down here are more specific to them. So target audience analysis, you would use intel, mostly human intelligence, but also signals intelligence and a couple other things to, well, see if people are receptive to your messaging, what their counter messages are, and if your civil affairs, PSYOP, public affairs are having the desired effect, or if they've been deceived or can be deceived. And then on this side of the house, the cyber side of the house, you have all the counter UAS missions, counter unmanned system missions, suppression of enemy air defenses. It's a very kinetic Air Force specific thing, but with more and more militaries, not just in the United States, and we do it a lot, and it being sensor fusion, interconnecting and meshing and creating diodes and data fabrics and all this bullshit on all these capabilities that were really meant to be standalone. And yeah, you had to do it the old fashioned way with humans, essentially debriefing inside of the jock. But now your radars are connected to your fucking embedders, are connected to your ATAC, are connected to your Gotennas, are connected to your Humvee, are connected to your Crows, are connected to your guided missiles. So, traditionally you would use electronic warfare to suppress them, or you would use, well, fires, right? Like actually dropping bombs on them, like what happened. And for reference, and even though you could see when this video, how old it is, if you're watching this in the future, it is the end of June 2025, and we just did a small war, I guess, with Iran. So we've seen a SEED mission, and then SKGBAT is soft kill ground-based air defense. This is more meant for those internet-connected air defense things, mostly in the QAS space. So a lot of this does overlap. I just took what I could from a bunch of different doctrine and public things that I read. So then within EMSO are three distinct capabilities, or three distinct groups, missions, however you want to see it. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to interpret this diagram. This is just trying to lay out, kind of how it all fits together. Spectrum management, that one's simple. Again, harkening back to that first video. Your comms plan, having the frequencies, that also ties into FFIRs, those friendly forces information requirements, where I want to know what bands people are using, or if you're doing an FTX with your buddies, you got guys doing shooting sticks lanes, you got guys doing EW com stuff, SIGINT stuff. You know, you want to make sure that you account for that. Otherwise, your collection is going to be thrown off, especially if you're doing things like statistical or machine learning based anomaly detection. And then, you know, theoretically, ComSec rollover and stuff falls within spectrum, but not really. Cyber electromagnetic activities, CIMA, formerly known as CNO, cyber network operations. You see that a lot in the mid 2010s, depending on, you know, material that you read. Broken down in 4 areas: OCO, DECO, CSER, COPE. Offensive cyber, defensive cyber, cyber ISR, which is cyber threat intelligence essentially, but also pre-targeting, which is more this. COPE, I made up the acronym. It's cyber operational planning and exploitation. So the preparation of the cyber battlefield using fucking Nmap and Metasploit, probably, because one of my coworkers worked at Cybercom and NSA for a long time, and I give him shit all the time about it because I don't believe that our cyber capabilities are being developed the way they need to be, but whatever. I work in industry and I really don't want to talk about it. Electronic warfare, covered that in the previous video. 3 capabilities. Electronic support, though, is SIGINT, dedicated to the electronic warfare mission to help with targeting, to help with battle damage assessment, things like that. Electronic attack, electronic protect, offensive, defensive. Are you seeing a pattern here, right? And then, you know, electronic attack also covers direct energy weapons. So yes, your Israeli space lasers and your sonic weapons and your freaking eye-burning lasers and your Havana syndrome and all that stuff. Electronic protection, the most important thing for us is emissions control. It's important for everybody, but emissions control, if you don't need a radio, you don't need a phone. If you're doing some goon shit, like not gooner stuff, right? Leave that stuff at home. It doesn't matter if you put your phone on airplane mode or you put your phone on, well, if you turn it off, it's going to ping the cell phone tower because of the way you're positioned. All the equipment we carry with us and in our house is monitoring us, is giving out emissions, NFC, EA, shit like that, right? That's all about emissions control. If you're going to talk on the radio, remember to talk on the right spectrum, on the right frequencies, at the right time. Follow your comms windows, follow the jitter, roll over frequencies, and then if you have the capabilities, obviously look at things like, you know, frequency hopping, encryption, be legal, all that sort of stuff. And then on the influence side, public affairs, I mean, pretty much everybody's seen this. Remember the whole Afghanistan withdrawal debacle and all those talking head colonels and late colonels they brought out on camera, like, oh, we have the situation under control. That's all about controlling the narrative. Public affairs is part of influence. Civil affairs has, well, a civil components in the name. It's interacting with civil populations in a foreign country, typically as part of a FID mission set, foreign internal defense, which is technically in the SOCOM side of the house, but hey, within COIN doctrine, counterinsurgency, thank you, Mr. Petraeus, or General Petraeus, whatever, you know, he kind of developed that. That was his brainchild, and civil affairs played a big role. You've probably seen them assist CST, cultural support teams. But here's a critical thinking exercise for you. Why would great powers want to deliver aid and send in aid workers to countries that they're not otherwise allied with when there's a natural disaster? Questionable. And then PSYOP, also called MISO, not the soup and not the soy stuff, military intelligence support operations, even though I guess they are a bunch of soys. That's more the dagger side of the cloak side of the house, right? So it's actually broadcasting propaganda, and you can see why CIMA and electronic warfare and even spectrum management would be relevant to that. I've already spoken too long, but that's my 10-minute or under spiel on information operations at a 10,000 foot view. I know a couple people I could bring on as needed if you guys want to learn more about influence operations or whatever, but there's plenty of FMs that you could read on that as well. And this is just a different version of the same slide. Really nothing to it. I was trying to be funny here, and I kind of left it in because I already went through all the effort of actually doing it. But yeah, nerd shit, user rate freaks, all CIMA script kiddie shit. And we really can't do too much EW. And if it does happen that EA is no longer illegal, shit's probably going bad. And then it's all propaganda all the way down, right? And really the reason why you're here is because, yeah, chronic turbo autism, which is fine. So what the hell is ISRT that we talked about? And really the important takeaway here is that surveillance is a continuous thing you do, and reconnaissance is a point in time thing you do. I know reconnaissance has more to do than, you know, just gathering information, but it's mostly an information intelligence gathering activity. I got it. Screening forces, advanced force preparation, preparing the battlefield, all that bullshit. Wasn't a Cap Scout. Wasn't any of that. Don't really care. And a better way to think of it within the SIGINT side of the house is, well, surveillance is, you know, your continuous stuff. It's stuff that's always listening. So for all intents and purposes for us, that would be like leaving RTL power running on a script with a RTL-SDR, and then you run that every hour. Maybe you have a cron job that'll continuously just bring in data from whatever bands you care about. And then obviously you could change it to RTL-SDR for your SDR choice. And then recon would be, you know, actually going out into an LPOP, collecting data from the field, especially if you're at a static position and it's like, you know, some of these emissions are looking really sketchy. I would love to get closer to them. I don't know where they are. You pull out your Yagi, your directional antenna for your surveillance phase. And then it's like, okay, we somewhat know where they are. So let's go further afield, another 5, 10, 20 kilometers out to a park or public hunting grounds or something like that, and continue our collection phase. And then targeting, we can't do that. We don't do that, right? We're civilians. Who the fuck are we targeting? McDonald's to go get a Happy Meal? But you do see this a lot, and you'll see it on the next slide. F3 AED, find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, disseminate. And harkening back to that last slide within information operations, a lot of that comes into here, but this is also kind of a self-fulfilling cycle where you find the enemy with signals, intelligence, GeoInt, HUMINT, you fix them using usually kinetic means or just, you know, keeping our assets on station and be like, hey, they haven't moved anywhere. A finish could be kill or capture, right? So if you capture them, you immediately go to exploit, analyze, disseminate as needed. And if you kill them, you could do the same thing, you know, using like DOMEX, document and other media exploitation, I believe is what DOMEX means. And that's relevant for this next slide. So I pulled this out of a 2012 report that was leaked by The Intercept when that whole Benghazi and Timber Sycamore thing exploded. And there's plenty of people who talk about that stuff, so I'm not really going to get into it. But this was written from the point of view of an analytics division as part of a joint task force on ISR support to counter terror, and not just any counter terror, small footprint counter terror. So that's Tier 1, Task Force Blue, Task Force Green out in Horn of Africa, primarily Ethiopia, Somalia, and Yemen, even though I think they only talked about Somalia and Yemen in the report. Maybe there was a couple other mentions. Very fascinating. I have it in the links in the description as well as in the final slide if you want to read off of it. But you could kind of see that F3 AED phase here. And as far as the different things that went into the various phases, APG is, I think, aerial precision geolocation, and then FMV, I forget what the FMV thing stood for, but SIGINT and GeoInt. Look how much, I mean, it's pretty much all it is, especially since these were mostly kill missions, so there wasn't a whole lot to exploit, right? You see very little finish-based intel, DOMEX, or interrogation to drive the next cycle. So intel's not the only thing that has a cycle, right? So why signals intelligence? I've already beat up a lot of these things, you know, just in the previous slides, and we're getting way up on time, and I'm not even, you know, 3/5 of the way done through this. But really, for us as prepared citizens, it's this part. We're going to talk more about this in the future because I want to get hands-on, show you folks how to get hands-on to the best of my abilities. But really, it's all about assessing capabilities and verifying emissions control, but also, obviously, with the theme being actual signals intelligence, making informed decision in that EME, you know, which verifying your MCON could be a part of that, operating it. You know, it's not like we live in semi-permissive or, you know, completely non-permissive environments here in the United States. But, you know, there could be other things that you'd want to be aware of, and it's just general awareness, right? And that's why I think it's good to, again, learn how this all works and fits together doctrinally. Maybe to imagine these guys doing it, right? Because they're military. This is Pennsylvania National Guard. Look at these doughboys. And then look at this Marine guy here with, I'm pretty sure that's SDR sharp or SDR plus plus now that I'm looking at it. But anyway, there's a bunch of other small little missions. And the other thing to take away from here is that, harkening back again, I keep saying that word, harkening, PIRs, EEIs, if there's one mental trap you shouldn't fall into, it's that, oh, my PIRs aren't different from one another. And that's fine. You might ask the same questions for different decisions, right? Whether you want to fingerprint all the voice comms on yours, figuring out who's using P25, who's using DMR, NXDN, if it's counter UAS or anything that has to deal with CUAS, adversarial EW, obviously you're not likely to see that in the United States, but there are assholes out there who set jammers up. That usually happens in the Pacific Northwest, but you guys are also a bunch of weirdos, so whatever. Geolocation, all this stuff, you might find that you gather the same data. So that's why, again, the cycle is important, and keeping meticulous track of notes, and why I think it's fine to honestly formalize reporting, even for yourself. Like, just type it up, or fuck, you feed it to ChatGPT for all I care. And if you guys are interested, I could teach you how to build artificial intelligence agents using various frameworks to do just that. Now, as far as some examples, I'm going to get too much into this, and these are kind of corny. These are some of the first slides I did after that god-awful information operations slide. But let's say you're tracking civil unrest. So, beginning of June 2025, there was a lot of spats of unrest, particularly in the Los Angeles area, over immigration policy. Not a political channel, doesn't really matter which way you fall, but even if you agreed with them or disagreed with them, maybe you would care about civil unrest, right? So it's like, hey, are the conditions likely to escalate, right? That's a pretty broad PIR, but then when you look at the EEIs, I think these are decently good. I don't know, can you think of a better PIR or better EEI? Comment down below. But, from OSINT, SOCMINT, right? Forum, social media, Reddit, Twitter, Blue Sky, things like that. Or maybe you're hearing more trucker traffic, more train traffic, more ham radios, or you're hearing increased traffic from LE, from emergency medical services, fire, rescue, hospitals. Are they talking about these specific things, right? Or is there just more traffic? And, again, it depends on your locale. In LA, I'm going to assume that they're encrypting a lot of the traffic. But if you live in some podunk area and all of a sudden there's a ton of traffic, again, you remember some of the first slides where the PIRs depend on your information environment. That's going to increase or decrease kind of like your own noise level. And that's why the analysis phase exists within the intelligence lifecycle. It's time to critically think of like, hey, is this pertinent? Is this out of the ordinary just from looking at it? Logistical disruptions. And then, I've never heard this, but hey, if anybody's boots on the ground in LA and actually monitoring traffic down there, it would be interesting if people have ever heard criminal activity or protesting. Technically protesting isn't illegal under the First Amendment, but rioting and burning stores and looting shit is. So that would be one thing to watch out for. And this is kind of like a slam dunk, right? And again, when you set up your EEIs, they don't all need to be fulfilled. These are just observable things that you're looking for. And then in a different version, a little less dramatic, right? Natural disaster. We have a very geographically diverse country. The country is very large. We have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have flash floods, mudslides, sinkholes, earthquakes, things like that, right? And maybe you want to monitor things such as the response to it, especially if it does lead into civil unrest, which a lot of time it does. I remember growing up during the blackouts in New York. Even though they only lasted a little bit, shit actually got like real hairy, honestly. But then again, I also lived in the hood. Hurricanes as well. There's been plenty of looting. And when I was still on Instagram, there was other like state specific militia groups that were formed because of this, where you had the landslides, mudslides in North Carolina, and then even before that, you had bad winter weather in Texas and in Tennessee, Kentucky, and a lot of these areas, shit kind of got dicey with like looters and unsavory types going through. So it's almost kind of the same thing, right? And this goes back to, hey, the PIRs aren't all that different. The EEIs aren't all that different. It's just the intent, and again, that information environment and that context in that decision. Now, what decision would this support? Maybe it would support you deciding like, hey, me and my group, like we got to go in because shit's getting bad. Or maybe the decision is that I decided to find out about it, right? Again, it doesn't have to be hyper specific. So signals intelligence subcomponents, not to rehash it because I spoke about it a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but there's 3 accepted or, well, widely spoken about, written about subdisciplines of signals intelligence: COMINT, communications intelligence; ELINT, electronics intelligence; PHYSINT, foreign instruments signals intelligence. So COMINT is everything that has to do with voice or written communications, cell phones, emails, radios, telephones, VoIP, all that stuff, as well as the metadata contained within it. So that's relevant to things like P25, DMR, NXDN, anything that's going to transmit other information like the talk group ID, the radio ID, the DMR ID, key IDs, things like that. Electronic intelligence is, well, anything that's non-communicative. So beacon systems, control systems. If for mapping the electronic order of battle, you'll see that a lot, right? Finding where the air defense is, finding where the KUAS batteries are, finding where the missile launch sites are, right? Like finding Pantsir systems, the Scander systems, things like that. Or, for American, it would be like the M270 MLRS, HIMARS, Avengers, linebackers, stuff like that, Patriot systems, right? And then foreign instruments, signals intelligence is kind of a catch-all for kind of ELINT, but also kind of comment. It really depends, but it's more like ELINT, but I would say it's almost a subcomponent of ELINT, where it's specific to, well, foreign instruments. In this case, it's drones, missiles, radar, satellites. You see it a lot in like Space Force Doctrine, which I actually didn't cite anything. I didn't read much of it, but you also see it in the other publications as well. So other SIGINT like Intel. Again, we spoke about this earlier, measurement and signature intelligence, MASINT. So that's quantitative analysis. That does include RF, right? Non-communications is supposed to be the distinction, but there's so much overlap between ELINT and PHYSINT within MASINT. I mean, even look at these two subdisciplines I pulled out, and of all the Intel disciplines, MASINT has the most subdisciplines. But radar MASINT and RF MASINT, so that's Intel gleaned by or from these sources or trying to fingerprint these sources, right? So there is a bit of an overlap. It's mostly sensor-based, right? But again, your SDR, your phased arrays, your microwave emitters, your directional antennas, all that stuff is technically a sensor. So, that's why I just wanted to highlight it here, that there's the overlap. And then TECHINT, another thing I mentioned, it's from foreign instruments, yes, but it's beyond the scope of satellites, drones, missiles. It includes equipment like being able to analyze the threads and the dyes inside of enemy uniforms, the vehicles they use, right? Which is why there's so much. You see this specifically in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, where both sides are trying to set bounties on high-value targets and also recover them from the field. And they'll send dudes on both sides out to get killed, right? Like you'll lose a whole platoon of dudes trying to get things like recover a Pantsir S1 or a Tornado S system, or recovering a HIMARS, recovering a Patriot battery, recovering the targeting and illumination radars, right? And TECHINT, I think it's really a subdiscipline of SIGINT, but it can be its own standalone thing. It really depends on the context. Obviously, we're not going to be doing a lot of reverse engineering in a scientific perspective as civilians, but that's why I do encourage you to go and experiment with a bunch of different things, different P-25s, DMRs, different drones, different gear, and you could understand, how they work, how they operate, right? And then that'll allow you to feed that back into ELINT, PHYSINT, MASINT, and so on. So there's also OSINT-led SIGINT. This is more relevant to us as civilians. Some of the signal information is open source. So some of these are my favorite ones that I use. SIG-ID Wiki is signals identification Wikipedia. So they have audio samples, they have waterfalls, they have the spectrograms that have hundreds, maybe even thousands of signals at this point, right? Everything from P-25 to Russian Vorezhne, over-the-horizon radars, to what APRS looks like, to what DMR text looks like. So I find it very helpful where if I'm doing bigger scans or I'm recording sessions that I'm capturing from another SDR like Cubic or SDR++, and then I see a bunch of, you'll see them like show up as dashes and beeps and bloops when you listen it back, then I'll go on a SIG-ID Wiki to be like, I wonder what that could possibly be. So that's a good open source intel source that you could use. RadioReference.com, great forums, but also they have a database, and it has just about every civil service and some military frequencies. Obviously, mil frequencies are controlled at the battalion level or the brigade level by a spectrum manager, so that'll always be different, and there's not a lot of FCC approved stuff that we could easily get that'll be able to listen into VHF low. HF is kind of its own specialty area in a way, but if you wanted to get started with the SDR, be like, well, who the hell do I listen to? Go there. You'll see federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, state law enforcement, game wardens, forestry service, fire, EMS, search and rescue, colleges, almost anything, especially if you don't have a unit in or you don't have a radio that has a promiscuous scan mode. So this is a good place to start. And then speaking of Uniden, I'm not sponsored by them at all. I have a lot of their kit. They have a support portal where you could get data that's meant to be downloaded into Uniden scanners like the Bearcat, but some of it's in CSV, so you could exploit that data as well and use it. but there is a lot of overlap between Radio Reference DB and Uniden. So as far as capability areas for the Citizen SIGINT repertoire, let's say you have your Intel cycle in the middle, and no matter what you're doing, again, if it's monitoring an ongoing situation, if it's just trying to plot out what your electromagnetic environment looks like, if it's looking for drones, if it's looking, even maybe for satellites, if it's looking for rogue interference, whether it's malicious or you're not sure if it is, there's a couple different things you need. I tried to categorize it or put it in capability areas, just things to be cognizant of. Obviously, a lot of this overlaps, like decoder, SDR software, mobile apps, even some of the specialty gear and data analysis. That all is probably the same thing, but it's worth calling out. Antennas, obviously, depending on what you're doing, you want to have the right antenna for the right job. You could get by, with just a regular old whip antenna, broadband, whatever comes with your SDRs, whatever comes with your radios. But eventually you want to look into things like Yagi or other specialized directional radios, especially if you're going to do radio direction finding, which you don't need any specialty software for. You just need people in different geolocations, different broadbands. And, I use that for broad spectrum scanning with my Blade RF. You've seen my mini goosenecks from Octane. That allows me to cover everything, from very low frequency all the way up into just right on that SHF, that super high frequency 6 gigahertz band with, 3 or 4 different antennas. And obviously, scanning all that takes a long time. So that's why I have those. And then use case specific modulation. I give you an example like for ADS-B or for LoRa, generally in that 900 ISM band, right? So just be cognizant, you use the right radio, right antenna with the right radio or the right SDR for the right job. As far as hardware, I think everybody should have an RTL-SDR, a V3 or V4, doesn't matter, preferably a bunch of them, because you can burn those things out. They do overheat when you're running scans. They are, pretty flimsy, if you drop them or something like that. It's always good to have them, distribute them out. They're very cheap, very affordable, very ubiquitous. And then the SDR SDK, I believe that's by, I don't know if it's just a single dude or a group of dudes, terminal armament, that allows you to run 2 RTL-SDRs in series. So that'll, double your bandwidth effectively. You could get up to 3 to 7 to 4 to 1 megahertz bandwidth of scan on the V4s, but it's pretty unstable. So I usually keep it in 2 to 3, especially if I'm scripting and I'm running the automation overnight for a couple hours. It's no real big deal. I've showed you one of my Blade RF 2.0s. That's, kind of a big boy SDR. I'd say that's like middle of the pack. And then there's some really high-end stuff. Not that Lime SDR or HackRF1 is high-end, but you'll have things that will be able to cover EHF, Ku-band, X-band, Ka-band, that sort of thing, which falls outside of my repertoire. I haven't acquired anything like that because there's several tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. Mobile apps, SDR software, decoders, you could almost speak about it all in once. Decoders will be for exploiting and processing IQ data, right? It could be decoders for AIS, decoders for ADS-B, for P25, DMR, NXDN, other things like that, right? DSD Plus and DSD Plus Fastlane are the more popular ones. DSD is built into a lot of SDR. Some SDRs have been cross-compiled for Android, so SDR++, SDR Angel. Those are also mainline SDR software suites that you could run on a mobile app if you wanted to take it out with you. So if you have a Graphene, a Lineage, EUD, or an EUD running, your flavor of Android, I'm not too sure about what runs on iOS, and I don't give a shit. Sorry, I don't like iPhones. And then the SDR software, like I said, a lot of overlap. GQRX, SDR++, SDR Angel, SDR Sharp, Op25, Cubic SDR. I'll be doing a lot of content. I would say download pretty much all of them. Most of them are supported on, NICs, Mac OS, and Windows-based systems, depending, 32-bit, 64-bit, right? ARM versus AMD architecture. And then obviously Apple Silicon's a little bit different, but it's technically ARM architecture as well. So just use what fits with your capabilities. They all pretty much do the same thing. Some of them have more advanced features, built-in decoders, better recording capabilities. Sometimes they could allow you to output to like raw QFFTs and whatnot. So that's just the general thing. Or you could use headless software, RTL power for the RTL-SDR. The Blade RF, being a field programmable gate array, has drivers specific to it, as does Lime SDR, as does Hack RFs. And hell, the Hack RF Havoc has its own embedded OS and suite of software that includes SDRs and other specialty things for like RFIDs and, like key fobs and whatnot, right? And then Some of that also overlaps with specialty gear, right? AIS, ADSB, passive radar setups, like a Kraken SDR, drone ID detectors, which are normally on 2.4, 5, 5.2, 5.8 ISM, but EPS boards, Arduino Unos, and then Unit and their close call stuff, right? For like a Bearcat and data analysis is something I want to show you guys how to use, but using, BI software, big data software to be able to, exploit and normalize a lot of the data, visualize it, especially if you're going to be capturing a bunch of it. And then don't really need to go over this too much, but here's some specific software that you could use and specific software libraries for UAS, maritime, and aircraft. And again, we'll be going into a lot of this, or I recommend go looking at CMAX Executor. I have him called out down below in the description as well as in the next 2 slides or so. He's forgotten more about commo stuff than I ever hoped to learn. He's definitely up there with commo goats on YouTube to learn about pretty much all this stuff. Now, compliance, I usually put the caveat at the beginning of the video. Here's it at the end. Don't do anything that the government would freaking, deep six your ass over, right? There's a couple things that are explicitly not allowed to be listened to or monitored. Military, defense, intelligence community, nothing cellular, and then radars, aircraft, guidance systems, right? It doesn't matter if it's civil or military. Don't touch that stuff. ADS-B decoding is fine. If you're doing sweeps and, you just see that there's emissions there, that's generally fine. But you shouldn't be trying to go radio direction, find people and whatnot. Or if you're going to do anything, do it legally. That's all I'm going to say. And if you don't, well, don't tell me about it and don't fucking record it and put it on the internet. And, don't tamper with people's encryption. Your own is fine, if you want to go ahead and try to do that. And then obviously don't transmit or jam on bands anywhere. Now, if you have some sort of hardened facility or some Faraday cage and you want to mess with electronic attack and see what happens to radios under certain wattages and certain bands, hey, be my guest. But again, do no harm is in medical and it's also in SIGINT and commo, especially as a citizen, unless you're a very high net worth individual. And if you were, you wouldn't be watching this. So sorry, we're all poor together. You're not going to get away with some bullshit, right? Unless your name is John Jones, I suppose. So now that we've gotten to the end of, almost an hour and a half of talking, how the fuck do I get started? You're probably asking. So really the easiest suggestion is go buy an RTL-SDR, preferably 2 of them in case you break one of them or one of them's bricked. They're affordable enough, and a couple of antennas. Download SDR software either on your mobile device or on your laptop, desktop, whatever it is of choice, and just go out and use them. Now, for the actual SIGINT part of it, if you have a training group or you could do this on your own, ask yourself a question that you would want to know. Whether it's civil rest map watching, storm watching, finding drones, finding, the type of air traffic if you want to fingerprint it, finding known emitters, understanding the sources of RF radiation around you. That's you don't have to have a direction or a decision to make. You could still build a CCIR, PIRs, and EEIs from them, and then go and try to do it. Go and, record data from the SDR. Go use RTL-SDR power. Go try to visualize it. Go try to analyze it and see what you could pick out from it. Use SIGID Wiki, use radio reference, use the subreddit r/SDR, whatever it is. I mean, really, that's the only way to learn it. Or, testing against your own equipment and TTPs. I've mentioned that a ton. Red teaming is a super cool thing that you could do. First off, it helps cross-train a ton of people in your group. It helps prove out if what you're doing, if your own OPSEC, your PERSEC, your MCON is up to snuff. Because if you could find yourself, well, shit, a military and intel agency could find you too if they so choose. And, maybe they won't want to. And then use all the open source stuff, all the references, read a lot, educate yourself. I mean, I feel like it took 2 minutes to explain. Just go and fucking do it, right? Just go and do it. So military specific resources, feel free to pause the video here. All this stuff that I could find easily is linked below. Some of it is not linked below for obvious reasons, namely that first one. So it goes back to that second targeting slide I did, ISR support to small footprint CT operations, ISRT FRAD. That's from the Intercept, and the Intercept actually has a bunch of leaked stuff about Timber Sycamore and the Horn of Africa, North Africa operations that you could read. It's very fascinating stuff. and all the different publications, and then some very specific ones that I didn't necessarily talk about, but I wanted to highlight as referential to the overall information operations domain. And then non-military resources, CMX Executor, I brought him up before. Here's a Udemy course if you wanted to look at ethical hacking on the security research side. I talked to a couple of people, like, yeah, that one's decent. PySDR is not a library. It's shows you how to use Python for SDR stuff, and there's a lot of like real formative RF theory content there that is very, very dry, drier than this, but it's good. Different forums, different subreddits, and even the frontier models for LLMs, man. I mean, I use them all every day. I am half my job is AI engineer, I feel like, building, fine tuning, quantizing, RAG, agent, stuff like that. I'd like to do content like that that is relevant to signals intelligence and whatnot. So if you're interested in that, let me know. But there's even more resources than that. These are just some that I could think of the top of my head. And with that, man, we're done. So we'll go back to the dirty tabletop and I'll close us out. All right, folks, thank you so much for bearing with me. Unless you just fast forwarded and skipped straight to the end, then what the hell? What's your problem? Anyway, I sincerely hope that you learned something. Well, that's the hope of the video, right? And that, maybe you enjoyed yourself along the way. I have done literally 7, 8 retakes of this damn thing. I've changed that presentation so many times. There's just so much information that when you're going through it, when I'm practicing it, in the car after dropping the kids off at school and whatnot, where I'm like, ah, damn it, like I'm missing some info. So, I put a ton of effort into it, a lot more errors than I care to admit. So, any feedback in the positive would definitely help. And if it sucked, I also want to know that because, that'll help combat my own biases if you remember that section from the slides. So as far as future plans, I wanted to talk roadmap for a second. I want to do more hands-on content with all this stuff and things related to it. Obviously, I have more SDRs and whatnot. So within the SIGINT talk track, learning track, or whatever of this channel, I'm going to take it, from soup to nuts, so to speak, right? Where it's just like, okay, how the hell do I get the drivers installed for these things? How do I install and boot up an SDR software? How do I use SDR software, different types of them? Eventually getting into some Python scripting, and then maybe we'll end up at AI, ML, and then statistical anomaly-based detection. Really, it's based on feedback from all of you folks who've, subscribed to the channel and whatnot. I love having that feedback. I know people want to see more traditional comms related content, so interspersed between them, I will do that. I'll probably do a breakout video specifically on DMR, a deep dive, probably in a slideshow, and then a couple series on these radios. I actually got a couple Civs radios, and you can see these are quite old, but hopefully they're good to go. I'm just waiting on some replacement parts and cables and whatnot. Shout out to Alex at Mojave Repeater. Yet again, as I said in the previous video, that guy's the man. So if you have any, DMR, Civs, and Gotenna related needs, he's definitely the guy to seek out for guidance, for troubleshooting, for services, for parts and whatnot. And he has great prices, a lot better than you would get directly from Civs or, well, it's Motorola now. And then from there, probably go onto an ATAC series because it does make sense now that I have more, even better networked radios and whatnot. Probably do some Gotenna stuff, some Meshtastic things as well, because I know that not everybody's going to be dropping, several $1,000s on specialized data radios, right? And then that'll actually incorporate GeoInt and a couple other things, and we could talk about that more in depth. And then that also makes sense to start looping in things like UAS content, right? For unmanned aerial systems. Unmanned ground systems actually have one of those, an old Talon 4, actually, if you believe it or not. I don't know how to close these things out still. So if you got family, you got friends, spend time with them, man. A bunch of crazy shit always goes on in the world. And if you're feeling down, definitely talk to somebody, right? And if you have a buddy, a family member who is, down in the dumps, if they're giving away stuff, if they just seem dejected, you're not a bad person for reaching out and, trying to shake them. As a dude, I've had moments like that where family showed up when I was going through rough times and be like, yo, motherfucker, you're coming with us. Like, it's time to talk. I'm not saying drag them off to somewhere, but, take them out of their situation, out of their setting and whatnot. And it's not supposed to be a somber note. I mean, we should all, as humans, help each other, right? This isn't so much a community. Maybe it will become one. This is a passion project, this YouTube thing for me. But, I've been through a lot. Some of you folks listening have probably been through a lot, right? And, I get it. But eat more steaks, lift more weights, I'll catch you on the next one. Mount Lethe Hellfire.